So, welcome. We are here with Bishop Will Willimon and his minion, Slice Penny, my new friend, and my old friend, Todd Littleton. Todd, I don't know if you and Will have met each other.
I don't know
No,
if we have.
we have not. Now, my claim to fame is I'm Tommy's dad, and you've met Tommy. I think
Oh yeah,
in in
sure have.
19 at the
Okay,
annual conference. Yeah.
yeah, got that. Oh, good.
So
Yeah, Tommy's taken like the most famous picture of you of all time. So,
that's right.
Hmm. Oh, really? Well, I did a good job on Tommy.
so Slice, as Will's minion, I want to start just by um, asking you: Have you changed your mind at all as a result of working alongside Will Willimon?
I would say I've definitely had to reassess some of my expectations for ministry and what I define as being busy. I was talking with Todd before about how, topic of conversation around Duke is, just how much does he do? Just how busy is he? And even the people who think they have a good idea, um, they are way underestimating it because I can tell you, the man doesn't stop. And
Oh,
the cool thing is that he does it out of his love for Jesus and his deep desire to grow the church. And I think that's what this book's all about.
Wow, that was a
wow,
very genuine, non-smart ass answer. That was good.
wow.
Well, he brings that, so you don't need to know. He's got that part covered.
I mean, it was surprising, Will, to realize that you're someone who actually has hobbies.
Oh,
You
really?
know,
Yeah,
painting, drawing, chicken. You actually have other things you like to do. It
I do.
comes as a surprise.
I do. Yeah. I uh, I think I've got, unlike most pastors, I got the kind of life where a lot that I do is visible. Um, so much of what like pastors do is invisible, and sometimes some of the most important stuff they do, like sermon preparation, is usually not done in public. And so I give people the illusion that I'm very busy, but I know a lot of pastors who work harder than I do.
Where did you come up with the idea of writing a book on how you changed your mind?
Well, I came up with the idea of writing a book that's kind of an old guy talking to newer people in the trade and the craft ministry, and got somehow attracted to First and Second Timothy, which have never been kind of my favorite books of the Bible. And and here's sort of Paul adopts that tone in these letters of, "Hey kid, here's how you do it. Uh, watch out for this. Be careful of that. Do it this way, not that way." And that's kind of what old guys do. And so I worked from there. An editor suggested the changing my mind. I must confess, I don't know that there's many radical reorientations here. However, there is a sense that um, I do think kind of adaptability and realignment, reframing is a virtue for ministry. Uh, not simply because, well, if you're a Methodist, you keep getting dumped in various places that weren't your idea, uh, otherwise known as our beautiful itineracy system. But and not only because the culture changes, and but also because we work for a living God, and a living God moves. And Gott nimmer ruht is how Karl Barth puts it, and that requires one to change.
Okay. Well, I wanted to dive right into your book and go to what I think is the best part of the book. That is page 170 and 171, um,
Was that the part
where
of the book you helped me with?
That's right.
Okay, got it. Yeah, got it. Well, I know you. Yeah, come on.
So I was supposed to ask questions to you at the end of this chapter on Jesus, and so I want to ask you a couple of these questions. One of which is, I say, I too, like Will, entered ministry thinking it was my role to be helpful and loving rather than to be truthful. Despite your reputation, Will, I know you to be an effective pastoral presence. How do you think we can best apply the gospel in pastoral situations, absolving sin, offering a promise, etc.? So talk about how you think about your role as preacher in a pastoral situation.
Well, I kind of like the way you framed that is you're a preacher in a pastoral situation. I remember when I took a clinical quarter of CPE right after seminary, an African-American student was in our group and he showed up with his Bible and the CPE supervisor said, "You ain't going to need that. Don't bring that Bible with you into the hospital room." And he said, "What?" He said, "This is kind of all I got." And I love that. And at the time when I saw that, I thought, oh, you're going to be learning how to be a psychotherapist on the run here in CPE. But we're preachers, and that is we proclaim the word. We keep articulating the faith. We keep retelling the story. And when we go into a pastoral situation, that we bring that identity, that role with us. I do think in my own ministry, I found sometimes it's easier to tell the truth from the pulpit than it is in a one-on-one pastoral like counseling situation. Yeah. On the other hand, I've noticed most in an earlier book, Worship as Pastoral Care, I kind of criticized pastoral counseling, CPE, etc., as basically, affirmation, Rogerian, what I hear you saying, and I'm just here as a midwife to help you give birth to your own solutions, kind of thing. Yeah, that does happen, but also the good counselors I've known are ones that tell people the truth. And I remember the alcoholic whom I got to go to AA, and he had really an amazing transformation in AA. And as I was congratulating him on how well all that had worked for him, he said, "Yeah, preacher, how come I had to, go out every Tuesday and Thursday night in a smoke-filled room in the basement of a Baptist church with a bunch of drunks to hear the truth? You should have told me the truth about myself more often." He said, "I probably wouldn't have heard you, but," he said, "I would have respected you more if you had." And good point. I said, "Why? Because I'm a sycophantic pastor who craves your affection and is afraid if I told you the truth, I might lose some of it. That's why." Got any other questions? But I think, too, a book that influenced me very much in the early days of my career was Don Browning's The Moral Context of Pastoral Care. And one of the points I got out of Browning's book was a lot of people in our world are in pain and suffering, not because of something their mama did to them or some trauma that has happened to them, but they're just confused. Somebody has told them some erroneous ideas, and some of those erroneous ideas are about God, and some of those cause the most pain. So a pastor is caring for people. Sometimes when a pastor says, "I'm sorry, you were raised to think that about God," it turns out that's wrong. and here's how God is more properly thought about and related to. Or to say to them, "You sound like you need to confess some sin. Can I be helpful?" in that enterprise, or I remember saying to people when I say, you seem like you need to be honest with God about something. And they say, as a campus minister, and sometimes they would say, well, I don't believe in God. I said, well, for somebody who doesn't believe in God, sure sounds like you're mighty nervous around him, for something that doesn't exist. So maybe we need to do some talking here. But anyway, I do think, and in my pastoral care of people, I'm going to say this tomorrow in class, but I think one of the great things to ask people, and find a way, you can find a better way of asking them than this, but to sort of, why are you talking to me? Why did you come to me? Is it because I'm free? It's because I'm paid by the church to have to sit here and waste an hour with you? No, why did you come to me? And so many times that's such a fruitful question, because many times the person is not even consciously aware of this, but you can say to them, wow, I think that you've got a God problem here. And maybe that is what brought you here. Let's talk about that. I don't do, uh, I'm not an expert on depression. I'm not an expert on anxiety complexes or erectile dysfunction or whatever. I'm a God person. And so it's interesting that you came to me. Now let's talk about that. And I think the trouble is, when we get through a seminary, most of us pastors we have so much more training in describing human lives, psychologically, sociologically, gender, economics, politics, than we do theologically. So it almost has to be a kind of conscious discipline to say, I'm going to talk about God. I'm going to talk about God. Got anything to say about God? Let's talk.
Slice, you've talked with me before about being in one church setting where you felt shamed and shunned because of who you were, but then feeling welcomed in who you were in a different context. And I'm wondering how you experience Will as both someone who's willing to tell the truth, but does so within a gospel frame.
Yeah, I think I'm taking a exegesis of the gospel according to Luke course, and it's interesting. Something a mom used to say was, something bad had happened, and then she would say, "Well, I think it's time for some people to see the table flipping Jesus." So, this idea that Jesus is much more complex than we often attribute him to be. In my pastoral care class this morning, we were looking at images of Jesus, and there's the 1942, I call it kind of the California surfer bro Jesus. And I think that serves as a good representation of our misunderstanding of, who Jesus is. And one thing Bishop Williams helped me a lot with is, understanding, okay, here's who Jesus was. He was a homeless Jewish man under the Roman thumb, who was deeply concerned with the people who other people weren't concerned with. And, you track his life, and it's like, here's your model for how to respond. And so I think the truth telling of Jesus, there are plenty of examples towards the middle of the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is just really getting fed up with his disciples. And he's like, look, you idiots, how much longer am I going to be stuck with you? And I could be like, oh, yeah, there's Bishop Wellman sometimes. But other times hey, here's what God said, and I'm going to give it to you unfiltered, just as it is. Take it or leave it. But connecting it to, my experience in the church, I think an important distinction to make is that at the second church that was so receptive of me, it wasn't just, yeah, we receive you how you are, but also, we think there's something better for you. And most importantly, Jesus Christ has bigger plans for you than you'll ever imagine. And I can promise you, when I arrived at that church, the last thing I thought I'd be doing, almost 9 years later, would be sitting on a podcast talking about God, but that's just kind of how Jesus operates.
That's good. That's good. Todd, you're someone closer to the end of your ministry than you were to the beginning of it. But that no joke this time, actually. And so I'm wondering. I know you've been reading Will's book here. What caught your attention?
I like the idea of hearing someone who's had 5 decades of experience, walk through familiar territory. I think that's not to say there isn't any keen insight or some things I hadn't thought about, but it is a matter of I don't know that at leaving seminary we are looking for mentors anymore, because we've, as Will said, we're over qualified, we think, and I think that that's a mistake. And so to engage someone who's still doing ministry after that period of time, describe how his own experiences led to, maybe as he put it, not necessarily a change of mind per se, but a change of perspective on a truth or reality that he's been living out or dealing with for a long time. And so I think that's what struck me as much as anything else. I haven't, of course, finished the book, but in those chapters that I have read, and then through the introduction, I really do think that we probably need to find a way to wire into young ministers, or even young like you. But you do this already so well, to find people to look to who've been doing it a while, and listening well, and not being not get your feelings hurt because someone makes a suggestion that maybe you should think about it this way rather than that way. That's kind of what struck me. I think that intentionally, building a relationship with you, a younger minister, son, and that was the joke part. That we need that same kind of relationship with younger ministers, that works. So you're looking both directions. How do you, if you want to say it this way, how do you end well? But also, what am I missing now? We older guys tend to still think that we don't really need much help. We don't need any more wisdom. We don't need to be challenged to think something different. And so I think we need to be tugged in both directions. Someone like Will and someone like yourself to say, no, I think you ought to be open and willing to hear what God might be saying to you as you continue your work.
I like the way Todd claims that we old people in this craft, we need younger people. I once did an essay on mentoring, and my whole essay was how much a mentor gets out of mentoring. I don't know about the mentee, but one of the great blessings of my life is getting to spend this last decade teaching in theological education with those who are coming into ministry. And it's life-giving. A few years ago, there was a great book on aging done by George Valiant, a psychiatrist at Dartmouth. And he identified the characteristics of successful aging. And one of the things that surprised me, successful aging, and particularly in men for some reason, is the willingness, the ability to contribute to the growth and advancement of younger men, younger people. And that stood out. And I realized how much life I get from that exchange of, hey, you want some help my pointing the way or whatever. And I think that's true. Also, it can be wonderful being in a kind of Paul Timothy relationship with people, in that you also get critique of one's own life, career trajectory, self from younger people. You better not be a student. You better not be a professor unless you're willing to have your life held up for examination by your students. There's wonderful moments where Paul in his letters will say, imitate me. You have a worthy example in us. And you think, gee, I know he's St. Paul, but darn, that just a bit, hey, kid, hey, imitate me. Yet I had to claim that, that's a very deep, maybe deeply Christian view of teaching is, hey, you're supposed to be able to look at my life, and I hope you look at it critically, but look at my life and say, hey, I'd like to look like that when I'm 65. I would like to have a life that has some of that trajectory to it. I'd like to profit from their mistakes. So I like Todd's emphasis that we who are mentoring, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not knowingly, we get a lot out of that. And in fact, maybe that's a question every pastor ought to be asked. Who are you mentoring into ministry? I remember someone noting that in my own conference I served, North Alabama, it appeared that we preachers were not calling new, fresh talent into the ministry and saying, hey, kid, ever thought about seminary? You ought to think about that. It's a great thing to do. Well, in a way, that's the saddest commentary on the self-image or low morale of clergy, is when we stop identifying, calling, encouraging others to pick up this vocation.
So Will, you're someone who has, I don't know, like almost 1,000 sermons on the Duke Chapel Sermon Archive. And this is how you're known. And yet one of the things you changed your mind about is preaching. And so I find that interesting. And then you've got this anecdote here on page 2930. You say, when I was starting out, someone told me that interesting sermons begin with a question and then offer an answer. Worse, later I was advised, preach the questions, not the answers. My mind changed. In the course of my preaching life, I found that the gospel is not the answer most people hope to hear. Open-ended questions are safer than the answer, who is Jesus Christ. So talk a little bit about how, so you're known as a preacher, and yet how you've thought about preaching has changed over the course of your ministry. So just talk about that.
I think I was maybe the victim of a certain liberal educational philosophy, which said, questions are a sign of intelligence. We're not here to give you answers and all. We're here to provoke your curiosity, encourage your questioning. If you're not questioning, you're not really digging in intellectually. It's kind of the modern world's way of knowing. It's kind of a screwy idea in a number of ways. I mean, for one, we all know you got to know a lot to ask an intelligent question. And you you know, that takes skill too. So much teaching is indoctrination. It's one generation passing on to the young what they know.
Yeah.
And I used to hear Duke undergraduates complain about these professors, which would come into class and say, "Hey, I'm gonna just put out some ideas for you. I'm not trying to do anything to you. I'm just put out these ideas. You come up and consider what you think makes sense." I remember the wonderful student who said, "I'm 18 damn years old. You know some of the stuff I think that makes sense. You're telling me I'm in charge of my education? That's sick." And I said, "Oh, how smart you are, kid." Uh, so I think I don't have all the answers, certainly all the answers about the triune God, but by God's grace, I got some of them. And I remember Walter Brueggemann talking about Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, and proverbial wisdom. And I've always despised Proverbs. One of not my favorite book of the Bible. No God, no redemption. Uh, as I've said, Proverbs is like a long road trip with mother. But the but I remember Brueggemann saying Israel loved its young enough to tell them what it knew.
Hmm.
Israel felt an obligation. Hey, we don't leave you to stumble around in the dark and make your mistakes and all. We're going to show you the way. Torah. Um, that's beautiful. And but every now and then, Slice, being a good protege, Slice is so good to say, "Hey, well, what do you think I ought to do?" And I'm, a lot of times he's not sincere about that. But he's patronizing and you know but I love it, and I just get all quivery and think, oh yeah, I've just been waiting for this time when somebody asks me, well, what do you think I ought to do? Give me some advice. I tell you one thing, though, as far as mentoring, and it takes a lot of security to ask for help. It takes a lot of security to ask, how do you think I'm doing? Or, I got a decision to make. I could take this road. I could take that road. What do you think I ought to do? And I think, we pastors ought to be willing to step up when we are invited into lives in that way.
That's good. It's Slice. I don't know if you've done a deep Will Willimon dive in the sermon archives, but I have over the years. And one of the things I think that jumps out is how much you've changed in your preaching, Will, over the course of your career. You mentioned Walter Brueggemann. There's a clear Walter Brueggemann phase in your preaching, and I think as someone who was younger when I started doing that, to kind of learn and seeing that you had an arc to how you approached preaching, it was what that communicated to me just starting out was a kind of freedom that I don't have to get it perfect. This particular, that like the change is like, it's, you're going to change. How you think is going to change, how you approach it's going to change, your style is going to change. And that, I think, that invites a kind of freedom to just be on a particular Sunday. I don't know if that resonates, because I know, Todd, you've changed over the years, and Slice, you're just getting started.
Yeah. And I think you're preaching, like, one thing I've noticed is definitely the use of stories. How it's like back in the day at Duke Chapel when you had the glasses and we're in that phase.
Joe Biden aviator classes.
Yes. But, I remember my first year, it was a Thursday night Methodist House of Studies sermon, and you preached and, told the story when you were in elementary school and had to go and get the boy who had skipped school. And afterwards, some people were complaining, and they're like, "I don't even get it." Like that, all he did was like tell the story, and what are you supposed to take from that? And then I went home and I re-listened to it, and then all of a sudden it hit me. And I think, I mean, I actually often wondered, never asked you, but it's like, look at what Jesus did. I mean, Jesus told stories, and kind of just left it hanging. I've noticed how that's something you've been doing, more recently. Is that because I thought it was like this prophetic breakthrough? It might be
Fred
obvious.
Craddock, that's a Fred Craddock gift that he gave me, a willingness to trust the story, to trust my listeners more in that. But it is a risk, and I Patsy would want me to add, sometimes overdo it, and she'd say, could have used about one less story, two less stories. Fred Craddock really perfected that art and liberated me to kind of let the story do the work and all. Here, Slice, you're right. My phone is running down, low battery. Once again, I should have listened to Slice. Let me go down and get the cord. But one of the dangers of that is that one, the story may be a really good story, but really have nothing to do with the gospel, particularly the gospel at that moment. The other thing is it's a kind of and Fred was criticized for this. Maybe I'm the one who criticized him for this, but it's a sort of saying to the listener, okay, you get to sit sort of in judgment on what's going to be communicated here. And at Duke Chapel, I had, of course, a bunch of well-educated people who sort of enjoyed figuring out things for themselves. Please, no, don't over-explain it to me. Let me find it for myself. And sometimes I think that can be dangerous. But I love you comparing me with Jesus. Oh, if he could only have been from South Carolina, think of how much better he would.
He probably wouldn't have been crucified.
Oh, that's for sure. I guarantee you would. No, that's so true. But just, it is amazing with his parables. Jesus is willing to be misunderstood. Jesus is willing for some people to say, hey, I don't get it. What's the stuff about the seed? And what about the birds? Yeah. And I think there's a lesson for us preachers there, that to leave people in God's hands and not to be tempted to present Jesus in a way that makes Jesus more accessible to their intellect than Jesus means to be. So.
That's a good. All right. So Nadia Bowles-Weber asked you a couple questions at the end of this chapter, one of which is about the forgiveness of sins. And so she comes from a Lutheran tradition where the purpose of the sermon is to hand over that absolution. What do you, as a Bardian, as a Methodist, what do you think when you get into the pulpit? What is it you're supposed to be doing?
I think I'm supposed to be doing proclamation, and you know that proclamation is that means a lot. That means I'm not doing explanation. I love the article Stanley wrote about my preaching, Why Willerman Never Explains. I'm not, and I'm not. Maybe I'm not doing exhortation. Maybe I'm not doing, I'm basically handing over news that is not self-derived, that somebody has got to tell you. You can't stumble upon it or drift toward it in your own life. And so I'd like every sermon, in some sense, to be news, to say, wow, I had to get dressed and get out of bed and come down here at an inconvenient
Mhm.
week to hear this. This is not common sense. This is not conventional wisdom. This, I love it when the gospel is that way. But maybe more specifically, I think I'm supposed to be preaching scripture. I think I'm supposed to take a biblical text and let it take me places I wouldn't have gone on my own, so that I can take them where they wouldn't have gone on their own. I think scripture, and I do stress this a lot in the book, I guess, that scripture really gives us something to say that is uh, great.
So from the pulpit to beyond the church, you have a chapter on evangelism. How has your mind changed when it comes to evangelization?
I think in the early days, I think as a pastor, I saw myself as basically caring for a flock, those people who showed up on Sundays. I also think I had such negative feelings about the guy in Campus Crusade asking you on campus, are you saved? Or when was the hour and the day you were saved? You never could come up with a good enough response to them. They, uh, uh, the word evangelical was starting, as I remember at that time, to be, uh, in disrepute. And so evangelism seemed not a big deal. It was kind of code in the church that I took my place in as pastor, kind of code for I'm conservative, uh, I'm troubled about racial integration or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think though I learned one. I learned, thank you, Stanley Hauerwas and others, but I learned that what you think about evangelism kind of rests on a political assumption, and that is, do you believe that we live in a roughly Christian culture in which one becomes Christian by being lucky enough to be born in Greenville and drinking the water, breathing the air? Well, if you don't think that's true, then it means that how the heck, uh, how do we live as Christians? And one way we live as Christians is by one, acknowledging the fact that if we are following this Jew from Nazareth, um, it's because somebody evangelized us. We had to be told the story. We weren't born with it. We didn't come up with it ourselves. Uh, and maybe that evangelist was mama or daddy or grandmama or some little church or something. Uh, but that's the first recognition. And then secondly, it's our responsibility to go tell somebody. That's what Jesus, what the figure at the tomb told the women at the tomb on Easter. Go tell somebody he's loose, he's raised. So that became a bigger part of my ministry, not as big as it should have been. Um, One is when you're a pastor, it's kind of hard to be an evangelist because you spend so much of your time with church people who've already heard it,
Yeah.
think they've heard it. So, yeah. Here,
So we'll.
yeah.
I didn't get all the way to reading the chapter, but I was intrigued by your chapter hearing the word,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking, could you describe in what ways your thinking has changed about your own hearing the word?
That's good.
Over a long life of ministry in a variety of contexts, and now
Right.
teaching. What what are some have or what are some of the things that you've noticed or have changed?
That's a great question, which I wish I had thought about more. I did a little book on listening to a sermon, how to listen to a sermon, how to hear a sermon. Uh, I don't think I did enough self-application in that book. But Todd, don't you think kind of an occupational hazard is that we stop hearing with those fresh ears that we once heard? I've heard Jason, for instance, describe his years as a student when the gospel really became real to him, or he heard his name called in the gospel. Uh, I guess it's only human that over time that becomes dulled. Then you add to it, you go to seminary or you major in religion in college and all, and this stuff starts to get kind of blunted and it limp. And so maybe one of the disciplines is to keep cultivating surprise and wonder at the word. I must say, I think we pastors are helped in that through lay people. And I remember one thing I loved about being a campus minister was the students not being grown ups yet and not being that well defended against the gospel. They kept reminding me how odd. And a story I tell is after chapel one Sunday, this young woman stayed behind. She was wearing an usher's robe. And she said to me, "Where do you get these stories you use?" And I said, "Well, growing up in South Carolina, you tell a lot of stories." And she said, "Well, I was really offended by the one today." And I said, "Offended?" And she said, "That's no way to treat people. That's no way to treat employees, to pay everybody the same wage at the end of the day, regardless of how long they've worked. That's unjust." And I said, "Whoa, that is not an original story with me. That's Matthew." And she said, "Matthew, what's that?" And I said, it's in the Bible." And she said, "Oh yeah, Bible, yeah." And she, so and I said, "Wow, I almost envy you that you are shocked, even outraged by that story." I said, "I wonder, was there ever a day in my life when I was so sensitized, when I was so fresh and new that I was shocked by that story?" I said, "I have just told that story to 1,700 people. And most of them came out and said, shook my hand and said, 'Good sermon. Thought it made a lot of sense. That's great.' You, on the other hand, no, this is ridiculous." And I said, "Just for your information, the guy that told that story was murdered just a few days later for telling that story." I said, "When he told that story, that was it." And she said, "Well, I can see why." And I said, "Wow, you're 90% there as a Christian. Come on, what will it take?" I said, "You got to be baptized. I mean, you got it." I said, "You got it," and 1,700 people didn't. Wow, including me. So I do think when you're ordained, you do listen to Scripture. You listen to your fellow Christians and the world. You do what Lee Keck called priestly listening. You listen on behalf of the congregation, and you go to the biblical text. You go out into the world, and you keep listening for a word. And that, yeah,
It's good. It's good.
That's good.
So you got a chapter on stirring the pot. Slice, you are Will's assistant now, have been for a little while. You have described this as being the most similar situation when you were working in extra legal ways. And so you're working with Will closely. And I'm wondering, have you noticed Will making decisions to stir the pot?
I don't think I've noticed him not making decisions.
I
That's
can't
awesome.
understand that. I'm old. I'm
That's awesome.
old. I'm accommodated. I am. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Give us a for instance, Slice.
I mean, even just a simple example in the way he designed the course. You know, he was mentioning tomorrow's lecture. It's Introduction to Ordained Leadership. I took it my first year. And I mean, the way he designed the course is just intentionally provocative. And one of my best friends at Divinity School, former lawyer, just super smart guy, and he'd sitting on the front row, didn't really ever say anything. And each week there's a different theme. And so we got to virtual worship. And Bishop Willman's asking, okay, how do we reconcile this, communion, these different elements. And for the first time all semester, I mean, the class got heated. People were arguing. I mean, voices were getting raised. And my friend Travis stands up and says, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "This man shows up every single Wednesday morning, just poking the fire, just begging us to get, discuss more stuff. And y'all want to get worked up over virtual worship? Are you kidding me? You got know all the things he's brought up." And, I reflected on that, and it's like, yeah, it's part of the truth-telling element that he talks about in the book. It's part of the prophetic preaching that he talks about in the book. Even the, pastoral care as he describes it. And so I think sometimes it can get misconstrued as just being provocative, just, to incite or to generate attention. But in actuality, from really spending time with him, studying under him, he's doing it in the name of Jesus, which is
good.
Pretty cool.
So Will, how do you go about discerning pot stirring, and how is that different from when you got started?
I guess this could be an evasion, but I guess I'd like to think it's kind of tied to Scripture. I think if the intent of a biblical text that you're working with appears to be to stir up things, I love that phrase where Paul talks about provoke one another to good works. Then I think that's a call to be provocative, to stir up things. I think it also, you kind of have to keep reminding yourself, Jesus becomes a model that Jesus, from one angle, just appears to be intent on starting an argument, starting trouble. He never backs down from an argument. He never says, "You aren't worth it," or "I'm not going to get anywhere with this," or "I got enough problems right now without causing trouble in this hick town." And then that's followed in the book of Acts by the apostles, Paul and all. I must say that I don't think it's my vocation to be provocative. I don't think I'm supposed to be controversial or stirring up trouble. I think it's mainly my task to be obedient. And I get the book of Acts is a model for me. Slice is doing a deep dive into Luke, Acts now, but I love it where you have these redundant sermons and these speeches by Peter, by Paul, and in spite attempts to try to say, well, now this speech is very different than the previous speech. This speech highlights this. The previous speeches have no. They basically all say the same thing. They just a narration of the gospel. There it is, laid out for you. Well, one time Paul gives that speech, and they beat the hell out of him, try to kill him, throw him in the jail. Got to get down the basket, get out of town, get out of there. He goes into the next town, gives the same speech, and they say, "Wow, this is great. We want to hear more about this. Is wonderful. I love that. It's not my job to be provocative. It's my job to try to tell the truth as I have heard it, as it's been given to me. And then sometimes people will say, "That's wonderful." Other times they will say, "How dare you talk like that?" And a lot of that depends not on me,
Mm-hmm.
but upon them. One person's good news is another bad news. When Jesus says to his disciples, "You just can't save rich people. It's just impossible. It just can't." But with God, God, hey, even that's possible. Um, who would have heard that as good news? Who would have heard that as bad news? So, yeah,
That's good.
I am kind of uneasy when people say, "Oh, well, you've always got to start some trouble." But I gotta confess, I'm sure some of the times I've stirred the pot has not been because I'm so faithful to Scripture, but it's just I do get easily bored. I don't. I like there to be variety. It's one thing I love about being a pastor, that you you gotta have your day rearranged by other people's needs sometimes, as yours was yesterday. Um, you are having a placid time, and then you look at the elections appointed for next Sunday, and you think, "Ooh, this week is going to be more demanding than I thought it was going to be." Um, I love that about ministry, and I don't know if I got in the book, but it helps if you can be easily bored.
Mm.
It helps if you're working for Jesus.
That's good. That's good. In this chapter, you mentioned your ordained leadership class that Slice is helping with now, and that you asked the students what will their greatest ethical challenge be as a pastor. I'm wondering how you would answer that question.
I think probably, as I praise them for, I think I do like to be liked. I need to be needed. You know, I that and that need. I need to be approved of, and I think one that can lead you to do some wonderful things, but it can also lead you to do some things you shouldn't have done, or to not say some things you should have said. Uh,
Yeah.
I do, though. I am a little uncomfortable in that. I'm I'm a professor at a university, at least now, and then I was a bishop in Alabama. Uh, so my courage or my agitation is really not that impressive. I think a good question to ask of any of us when we say, "Was this deed ethical or something?" How much did it cost you?
Yeah.
I know I didn't sign the big statement Jim Wallace and others were doing about the election, condemning Trump. Uh, I am glad to condemn Trump. It's kind of low hanging fruit, but
I didn't know they had a statement out. That's funny.
yeah, and so we need you to sign this and everything. And I'm thinking, like, a professor at Duke Divinity School says, "Gosh, I don't think Donald Trump is a good idea." Wow, that takes zero courage. And it flatters my own pride. They tried to give me an award in Alabama because I sued the governor and the state legislature over immigration with the Episcopal and Catholic bishops. And I said, no, that didn't cost me a thing. I got some nasty letters, but then I had the joy of writing them back, nasty letters. But I said, I can give you a list of dozens of Methodist preachers in little Alabama crossroads who spoke up. They stood up and preached this evil legislation brought by the Republicans. And I said, and some of them have paid huge prices for that. That's interesting. That's impressive. And so I think I love working with pastors when they do speak up, and I think, wow, that took courage. I don't know that I have.
So I'm wondering, if I asked Patsy how you've changed over the course of your ministry, what would she say?
I don't know. She's downstairs, but I'm not going to go get her. I think I was shocked. The Birmingham paper interviewed her when we left Alabama, and the Birmingham paper asked her, what has surprised you about him as bishop, as opposed to him as in the other things he's done? And she said, courage. And I said, what? And she said, well, I should have said persistence. But she said it used to stand up there and say things and plead with people. And I'd sit there and say, they're not going to do this. You know, they're not going to do this. You're just going to make them angry. And said, darn it, if you wouldn't go back the next week and say, like I was saying earlier. And she said, I found that astounding just to watch that. And so anyway, I thought that was nice, but I wonder, I don't know. I don't want to speculate about that, but there is a sense, though, it's a great question, and that most of the interesting changes we go through, I think we're not aware of them. We're not conscious.
Yeah.
Friends, and some of the friends happen to be friends we're married to, but to say to us, I say in the book, I can remember as a young minister, some of my buddies from college and all would say things like, you've changed. You're not the same fun-loving guy that we knew in the fraternity and all that, Well, one, the world has so many ways of policing you to shut you up and to make you easier to deal with. That's one of them. Also, hey, when you've had hands laid on your head, I think the church is really upfront with you. We intend tonight, by the gesture of laying hands on your head, to make you a very different person, to change you. And so somebody better say to us, wow, you've changed, or we really haven't lived into our vocation.
That's boom. That's a great place to end right there.
Great.
So Slice, give them the title of the book and where they can find it.
So the book is Changing My Mind. You can get it through Abington or on Amazon. And Jason, we can send the links attached to the email.
Yeah, and I like your idea of a little crackers and grape juice hustle with this book too. So we'll do that.
Jason, thanks for your participation in the book. I had younger people in ministry read a chapter and then respond to the chapter with some questions. Jason did that to the chapter on preaching, and it was great. So thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about the book, talk shop about the book, and that's
always great. Yeah. It's always good to see both of you.
Well, Slice and I we're doing donuts for the class tonight.